presented by Dano's Seasoning. Yum yum, get you some.
All right, guys, welcome into the newest episode, the latest episode of the Sunbelt Syndicate. We have a special co-host with us tonight as Casey from the Herd Bros has decided that he would take time out of his busy schedule to be a part of the show as TJ hit the transfer portal earlier today. So hopefully we can keep him on the team and talk him back. Even though he's entered his name, maybe he'll take it out and stick around like some of these guys have done. Before we get rolling along too much, and we are with you from the first kick to the last pitch of football, basketball, baseball. Our latest basketball episode is out now. Obviously, for those of you who are routine viewers, you can see behind me the setup and background is obviously a little different. What the hell is this team right here, as Casey and I are just talking about? But I am in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. We've got some Penn State fans in the house. That's what I grew up as. So that's why you see this behind me, kind of let you guys know where I'm at. And then it's not the typical setup. But tonight we have a really fun one for you. Obviously, Casey being a big Marshall fan, and he's also going to take part in flying across the country here shortly. I think we'll get him to talk about that a little bit too. But Dubby Energy, Fanplex Graphics, TSN Off Road, and Dano Seasoning, all there at the top of the screen, and links in the bios to get the discount codes for all those great sponsors that we have currently for the show. So without further ado, Casey, man, how are we feeling tonight?
I don't know, man. I have a feeling that some of the things that we are going to talk about, especially related to my own team, might not, they might not sit over very well. We'll see what happens. And let's add soccer to the list of things to talk about. Marshall's still in the NCAA tournament, so this could be another year for us. And
I don't know how much you know about where I'm usually at, but I live in Chapel Hill, which is right in that triangle area of North Carolina. So if the Herd make it to Cary, I will find myself there. I will definitely find a way to get some tickets to at least one of the sessions where hopefully, I'm not going to say anything, hopefully something happens where it's important for me to take part in that. I did, touching on the Marshall soccer aspect, was it just last year? I think they played a first-round game against Elon down here in Burlington, North Carolina. I guess I don't know if it's technically in Elon or Burlington, but either way, it's right here, right down the road from me, like less than an hour. So I went over there with my son, and of course, it ends 1-0. When we were trying to beat the traffic before halftime to get to the bathroom and back, their bathroom's located outside their stadium. It's a weird thing. Anyway, I take my son. He's 5 years old at the time. I take him over there, get to the bathroom. Somebody scores. The place goes nuts. It's loud as hell. I'm like, oh, man, Elon must have scored. So we walk back. I'm not even thinking anything of it. I look at the scoreboard, and it was Marshall who had scored on Elon's field, and the crowd erupted. I think there were more Marshall fans there than Elon Phoenix fans. So that was take pride in your soccer team, Marshall, because that was awesome.
We travel very well, and especially, I mean, if you saw any of the games from the 2020 season, I mean, we were down there, we were playing against teams from the Carolinas, and we had the whole place packed out. So we have very passionate fans, especially when it comes to soccer now. That's what success can do for a program like Marshall. So we're very proud of how we travel. And hopefully, if we make it again this year, I didn't have the opportunity because of COVID last time. So maybe if we make it back there to the Cup, I might be able to be in attendance.
Nice. Well, we'll definitely have to meet up if that is the case. But fingers crossed, knock on all the wood we can. I think there's some wood slats behind me, behind this great curtain that you see. So I've knocked on it appropriately for that aspect. So we will go ahead and jump into the football action, though. We'll go from one football to another. The preview for Week 14. Here's all the matchups. Once again, there's obviously no out-of-conference stuff left, no craziness, no silliness. All 14 teams will be in action to wrap up the week with a lot at stake for maybe about half of them, because even if they're not going to the championship game, they've got a chance to go to a bowl in a couple of these matchups. So obviously some important things, and obviously some big rivalries to speak of as well. So before we get into that, let's take a look here at the standings, just to kind of get everybody on the same page. We can see how it's laid out. We will go through the scenarios here in a minute, so we won't talk too much about that. But Casey, are there any teams that maybe stuck out to you preseason you thought might be much higher at this point that ended up here closer to the bottom, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think everybody thought that App State would be running the East this year. And so obviously, they got blown out early by South Alabama. They came to Huntington and we beat them. And from that point on, they've kind of been working their way up from the bottom. So I'm definitely surprised by that one. And I'm surprised by Georgia Southern being as high up as they are, just because I don't think anybody really expected that preseason. As far as the East goes. Now on the West, I'm not too surprised by Louisiana. I think the surprising ones for me is we thought Texas State would be a lot better than they ended up being this year. And Troy even. I mean, Sumrall leaving to Tulane obviously hurt them. But you look at JMU and Troy and compare them to one another. Both of them, they both got gutted. Their players left, coaching staff left. JMU has obviously fared better this season than Troy has, but Troy has picked up a couple of wins here that have helped shape the race in the conference for the championship game. So, but those are the teams that I think have surprised me the most this season.
Yeah, I fully agree. Those are definitely the four easiest. It is crazy to think about, right? Like JMU, 8-3 overall, but just 4-3 within the conference. It's kind of a shocking disparity to think of that. They got the Power 5 win. They had a lot of publicity and media attention because of that, and now they're sitting at 3 conference losses. So it's interesting to see what has happened to them. But again, like you said, even more interesting to see what's happened there in Troy, although they do seem to be turning a corner a little bit here towards the end. That rough game against Louisiana where that second quarter got away from them, but otherwise a very tightly contested contest for the other 3 quarters. So interesting to see those standings now compared to what we thought many of us would see going into the season. And Casey, I know you didn't officially get an invite to do the power rankings because this was a little bit last minute with TJ's change of plans. We will present these things as we normally do, and Seth decided not to participate this week, so he may have been busy with some other things. So there was 3 of us that changed a little bit of what the picture looked like, although I don't think it's been too much of a shock. The Cajuns and Marshall remain up there at the very top. Marshall technically jumping. I think we had JMU in 3rd place going into last week. But obviously with that loss against App State, they had dropped. Georgia Southern now up there. So it's interesting that Marshall and Georgia Southern are 1 and 2 in the standings. And right here, they're 2 and 3. Just 1 spot separating them in our power rankings, just as the standings do as well. A-State continues to surprise me a little bit with the victories they keep coming through with, even though they're not necessarily the most impressive because of the eye test. They have the number 5 spot right there, very close in margin between getting above JMU, but they just fall short of that. So they do stick there at 5 this week. South Alabama, another victory. Gets them up to 6 in our power rankings. And we've got some teams that have dropped a little bit. App State climbs just slightly after that victory over JMU. Are there any teams that you would have in a different spot?
Overall, this looks pretty good. I like Marshall on top of Georgia Southern. I know obviously the result on the field was different, but if you would have asked me my power rankings the minute after that game ended, I probably still would have had Marshall in front, just because, I mean, if we're all, and this is not me being biased, hopefully, it's just truly the way that game ended, the way that we blew that lead with multiple fumbles by our quarterback that runs the ball 15 times a game. I mean, it was just so random. Everything went wrong that could have went wrong, but 3.5 quarters, Marshall dominated that game, and I think we're the better team. So I like that. I like to go with head-to-head, but in some situations, obviously, head-to-head's not all that there is. I was going to say maybe App State feels like they've turned a corner a little bit, but they do have the head-to-head loss here in the last couple of weeks against Coastal, so they're probably in a good spot too. So overall, I mean, really no complaints. ULM, I will take a moment to comment on the decline that they have had. They started out so hot, and in many power rankings were in the top 2 in the conference after the first 5 or 6 weeks, and then to see them at the bottom again, it's disappointing. I wanted to kind of see them be successful this year, but I think that's where they're at right now. Yeah, no,
it's hard to not move them down when they continue to lose, and it's like you said, it's the disappointing ending to what they've done on the early part of the year, but. Yeah, we'd always questioned it. I think, I don't know if they'd even gotten up to 2 or 3. I know they were at 4 and 5 easily for a while, but I know there was some trepidation to put them too high because of how they were winning. And when you look at the offensive statistics, you're like, man, Hardy's running the ball well, but quarterback wise, they're not chucking it all over the place. They don't really have like a big time standout wide receiver. The defense is winning them games, but then the games that they've lost, some of them have gotten away from them pretty good. So it's just it's tough. It's tough. Like you said, it's tough to watch a team that looked like there was so much excitement and a great turnaround happening, and then they've just faltered down the stretch here. Now their strength of schedule did improve a little bit too, so that's a part of it, because that early season schedule, Texas made it look a lot worse than it was as far as numbers were concerned, or a lot better than it was, I guess I should say, because they played some pretty weak teams to start off the year. But yeah, we'll take a quick look at where people had people lined up individually. And speaking of Ben James's question of where's TJ, he has some family in town, and it was going to be one of the last times he could see, I think it was his brother, he said, for like a whole year. So he wanted to take advantage of that. I will always lean on the family aspect. So I am not going to hurt anybody, especially this time of year of all times, to, make him stick to his commitments when something like that comes up. So there's individually where we had some teams ranked. Not a crazy change from probably what you just saw, because TJ and I have been doing this throughout the whole season. Marv's is probably just a little bit different. I kind of value Troy a little higher. Again, with that late season kind of flip, I guess I got them a little higher than anybody else really had them sitting. And I punished ULM a little more than TJ did when I'm flipping that Georgia State and ULM, because I thought Georgia State getting that victory over Texas State, you had to deserve to jump at least one spot, right?
Yeah, you're very high on Old Dominion, and he is very high on Arkansas State in comparison. So that's interesting. So Old Dominion, walk me through the thought process there. I agree that they've kind of, well, it depends on what point in the season you look at. I mean, I certainly thought last weekend would be a challenge for us because they seemed like they were playing a little bit better football. They've obviously had close games with like South Carolina this season. So, but you've got them at number 4, and they're 4-7 compared to JMU at 8-3 this season. So,
yeah, so
them at number 4.
I probably punished JMU more than rewarding ODU. Like if you see that one there, obviously ODU doesn't have an up or down arrow, so they just didn't move for me. Whereas JMU was kind of punished more for that loss to App State, which I don't know. Being there in person for that one, I just wasn't blown away with what I thought. The beginning of the game, I thought I saw what I was going to see the rest of the time, which was a dominant JMU performance there for the first, maybe just over the first quarter aspect. But ODU has really impressed me with their play on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, They were better at the beginning of the season, so they have tailed off there. They have been figured out there on the defensive aspect. So I didn't love that, and maybe it could have moved them because of that. But the offensive side has really, really turned a corner, and really, one reason they're at 4 is I'd have a hard time not taking them over a lot of the other teams in this conference right now. Now, those top 4 and 5 teams, obviously they're part of that for me, but those are the ones that are either toss-ups or they'd probably be just under as a favorite type of look goes. But I don't see how they wouldn't be the favorite over just about everybody else below them. Maybe South Alabama's more of a toss-up. A-State, they have the record over them. But again, the eye test, I like what I see out of ODU more than I like what I see out of Arkansas State. Arkansas State reminds me of those Kansas City Chiefs right now. They just keep finding ways to win, but it's not like you're not blown away, right? Like, I was just in attendance for Chiefs-Panthers on Sunday, and I thought I was going to see a blowout. Wasn't even going to be close. Shouldn't have been close, but the Chiefs struggled to win. And I think that's kind of what I'm seeing with A-State. Hey, good for them. Power rankings aren't standings, and they're better in the standings than they are in the power rankings. So good for them. But as far as I'm concerned, I just have a hard time trusting them to get it done. Whereas I guess TJ, as a former player in him, can tell you that he definitely values the wins over the losses as far as that's concerned. So he's probably putting them a little higher because of that.
Right. Yeah. Old Dominion, Joseph, he was giving me Grayson McCall vibes in that game the other night against Marshall. And how we came out of that one with the win is beyond me, because it just felt like the momentum every time they touched the ball on offense, kind of like you said. I mean, unstoppable. That kid, he's good, and he's a freshman if I remember correctly. So he's going to haunt Sun Belt defenses if he stays in the Sun Belt for a very long time. And that does worry me in the future because I really do think that he reminded me so much of Grayson McCall at Coastal, and that's just what I felt like I was watching that game. Marshall, though, it's funny you say Arkansas State gives you the Kansas City Chiefs 5 because, I know we're on a 5-game win streak, but I feel like it's been a grind for most of those. Now, obviously the blowout of Southern Miss, but ULM came into town. We got out of there. And now the interesting thing about Marshall is that we have been up by multiple scores, like 14 points plus in almost every game that this season in conference play. And then we have let the other team come back into the game and make it closer. So I guess if you look at it from that perspective, I can see why there might be some confidence on Marshall, but I still have reservations. There's some days where I'm like, you know what? We're in the Sun Belt East, and the fact that we have the same conference record, like I want to say we're number 1 in the power rankings. And then if you give me more time to think about it, I'm like, I know we're on a 5-game win streak and we're finding ways to win, which is very important, but I don't feel like we pass the eye test as much. So I see it both ways. And that's why I'm interested to see other people that are not Marshall fans value us the way that you do, because it gives me some clarity. At least I feel like I'm not being as biased when I say that we should be up there. So,
yeah, and we'll take a look at Marv's. I don't have as much because he's not on here today, but he's on the Sunday wrap-up show, which has been Monday the past 2 weeks, actually. But yeah, I think the thing with Marshall that we value the most is they seem to have, you're looking for that kind of superstar edge in a couple of positions. Quarterback, I think check, right? I mean, maybe he's not the best you've ever had or anything like that. I'm not going to say that, but he is very capable of breaking a game open and winning you a game. Now, we saw at Georgia Southern, there's a possibility that some mistakes and that could go the other way, but that's what's going to happen when you got a guy who's electric with his feet and maybe take some chances to make some big plays. You've got the running back in AJ Turner, who has had some health issues here as of late, but did return to the field last week. And you've got Mike Green on the defensive aspect.
Right.
It's just a total check mark. And then also you've got the record to go with it. So it's a reason to kind of back your feelings about, okay, this team is good record wise, but what do they look like? Well, you've got some players that are sticking out. Obviously Green getting nominated for the Bednarik Award was really, really impressive as a semifinalist. Unfortunately, didn't make the final 3, but he had to be real close as far as I'm concerned, because that guy's just been absolutely on fire all season and been in the backfield more than anybody else I can remember. That's for sure. So
he's leading the country in sacks and tackles for loss and sack yardage. So
yeah,
whatever the final 3 have on him, obviously I'm sure those 3 are from power conferences, and that's probably the reason that they got the nod. But it's not like he was a ghost against Virginia Tech and Ohio State either.
Right.
So
yes.
he has proven week after week that, he can stop the run, he can stop the pass. He's very agile. He gets in the backfield, and that's why he leads the country in those statistics. So it's unfortunate he didn't make the cut, but I think he's a 2nd-round draft pick, honestly, depending on the kind of pro day that he has.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he has a great pro day. He might even be first, because I've just been blown away with him. I mean, like you said, even against that really good competition on the offensive line on the other side, he was still noticeable. So it's not like, oh, he's only noticeable at the G5 level. I mean, right. You hear that sometimes, like, what did Ashton Genty do if he played for a power team? And you'll get to see him in person next week. Or I guess, is it this weekend or is it next weekend?
Next weekend. It'll be for the Mountain West Championship game. And I have my flights scheduled to where I can be back in Huntington if Marshall hosts, which we will talk about that, I'm sure, later in the show here. We will be talking about the scenarios. So,
yeah, well, let's get right to it. Like I said, we kind of talked about all the other rankings, so we can move on from that. Marv can, throw those out there for next time we're on, but they'll probably change by then too. Of course, the first 2 are the easiest 2 to understand. If Casey's Marshall Thundering Herd win, they are in the championship game. Now, would they host or not? Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into that. But as far as who's going to get in there, the easiest 2 to know are on the screen right now. The Herd and the Cajuns. All they have to do, both of them, win, they're in. Okay? So there are tiebreakers. I have them listed here. Marshall doesn't have tiebreaker over Georgia Southern, who's the only team left. So technically, That's why their tiebreaker is listed as none. If they do end up with the same record, they won't win the tiebreaker. So that's why you're seeing that over there. For the Cajuns, if they were to lose to ULM, their tiebreaker is over Arkansas State. Notice it is not over South Alabama. So it is imperative that the Cajuns win and not have it come down to a tiebreaker over South Alabama in that one. Casey, thoughts on what you're seeing on the screen there or anything like that?
Yeah, like you said, it is pretty simple for Marshall. If we win, we're in. JMU with a loss last week obviously is no longer eligible.
Correct.
And then Georgia Southern, they've got a home game against App State, so there's room for them to make some noise there. And then Louisiana, this is not going to be a guaranteed win for them. I mean, ULM obviously is on, I think, a 5-game losing streak. It is very, very similar to what happened to us last year when we were 4 or 5-0 going into the NC State game, took NC State to the wire, and then we lost our next 5 games after that. And we had to get that late season win to become bowl eligible. So they've got a lot to play for, obviously. First time being bowl eligible since COVID, or pre-COVID for that matter. Yep. So they've got a lot to play for there. But you're right, yeah. Louisiana does not have the tiebreaker over South Alabama. And I think Arkansas State has also been eliminated. The Sun Belt put out a article today walking through the different scenarios. And I do think that it's between just 4 teams now for the conference championship game.
Gotcha. I'd seen a little bit of both, I thought, but maybe you're right. But the reason I include them is because if you look at it, it is a possibility that they would all end in the West with 3 teams with the same record. So I did include them just to kind of show that. But yeah, I think you're right. They may have been eliminated, but that Sun Belt tiebreaker page is just a mess.
It's odd. It's very odd.
Should make it a little easier to digest, and maybe people wouldn't have such a hard time figuring out. Because to me, it looks like they talk about head-to-head. Is there something underneath head-to-head before they talk about the rankings all of a sudden, though?
Yeah, so it's head-to-head, and then I think that's where they kind of talk about within your own division.
Okay.
Or something like that. Like, and I'm looking, I have it pulled up right here. I mean, if Louisiana loses this weekend, their 2 losses in conference play are in the West, just like Arkansas State. So it can't be that. I mean, they both got the same divisional win percentage, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
But it is something else, and I don't know what it is. It could just be that Arkansas State is so far behind in the computer rankings compared to Louisiana that there's just no mathematical possibility at this point, but it is a little bit confusing.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely confusing. Ben James has maybe heard more about it, being a Red Wolves fan, specifically saying Red Wolves have been eliminated. Red Wolves needed Louisiana to lose 2 and Bobcats to lose 1 in order to advance to the title game. So sounds like they are officially out. But again, I've included them because their record could match who ends up at the top. So we'll explain why they wouldn't make it in that regard. But again, we talked about both teams here. Georgia Southern goes up against App State, and we'll talk about that rivalry game here in a minute. They did own the tiebreaker over Marshall after winning that head-to-head matchup earlier. South Alabama finishes with Texas State. So not only do they need Louisiana to lose, they have to beat a team like Texas State, who has dropped some surprising games and just dropped that game to Georgia State, but dangerous. I don't know, both of these offenses could explode and both of these defenses could be not great. So it's kind of an interesting thing. But South Alabama does, once again, hold that tiebreaker over Louisiana. So if they get to that point, it gets real interesting. If anything, you wouldn't mind that just because the likelihood of Marshall hosting improves with South Alabama being on that other side. So
it absolutely does. And I don't know if you want to talk about that now or later, you let me know, but I have my theories on that. So
yeah, we'll just
wait to get into that.
No, we can talk about that right after this. So just to wrap this part up, again, must win for those other teams, and they needed a little help. Again, now we officially know that this is not capable, but must win, and the impossible to happen was Arkansas State not only beats ODU, but they would have to have the 2 other teams above them in one spot and tied with them in the other spot with South Alabama both lose as well, just to end up with the same record. But again, some other tiebreaker has completely eliminated them from contention. But before we move on to the first game, go ahead and talk about possibility of hosting the championship game in Marshall?
Okay, so here's the situation. If you guys are not aware of the tiebreaker scenarios, basically it boils down to three things. Number one being head-to-head. Marshall and Louisiana did not play this season, so that is irrelevant. Marshall and South Alabama also did not play this season, so that is irrelevant. Well, I guess South Alabama already has 2 losses, so the only way that would come into play, I guess, is if we lost and Louisiana lost. But
good, yes.
So that is a possibility, I suppose. But here's the situation. It goes head-to-head, and then it goes to college football playoff rankings, which is interesting because that is, I feel fairly confident that potentially Indiana computer rank, if you look at the different ranking sites, and I've got them all pulled up right here. There's 4 of them. You've got the Colley Matrix, and in that one, Marshall is currently 38th, Louisiana's 31st. And then you've got the Wolf ratings. Marshall is 39th, Louisiana's 36. In Massey, Marshall 53, Louisiana 46. And then, actually, I don't have the 4th one pulled up, but I know that it is within 5 to 7 spots. So realistically, James Madison is about in the same spot as Marshall. Like, I've got Colley pulled up right here. JMU is 49th. ULM is like in the 90s. So even if Louisiana beats ULM, Marshall is going to be beating a much higher rated opponent if we win this weekend. And I just imagine that, we jumped 6 spots this weekend with a win over Old Dominion. So it is not impossible to think that maybe we jump 5 spots and Louisiana's actually harmed a little bit, depending on how they beat ULM. If it's not a blowout fashion, the ratings might not favor that just because ULM is lower in the ratings now. So I'd say there's a greater than 50% chance, in my opinion, that if we beat James Madison on their field, a team that's 8-3 and rated pretty much top 50 in all of these ratings, that we would jump Louisiana for that tiebreaker. It's not guaranteed, obviously, but I feel pretty decent about that. My concern, though, is that if Louisiana does win, they will be 10-2. And we all know that the committee does not watch Group of 5 football.
Yeah.
Except for maybe Boise State. I don't even think they watch Tulane. I think they just throw Tulane higher because recency bias, American bias, whatever. But they clearly do not watch as much Group of 5 football. And if you were in their shoes and you're looking at the Sun Belt standing and you say, well, we've got a 9-3 team and a 10-2 team, at the simplest, you would maybe say, well, we're running out of 4 loss teams that we can rightfully put in the top 25. So we're going to throw 10-2 Louisiana in there at 25. Yep. At that point, they automatically get home field advantage. Now, you could make the argument with their recent loss and because we would be on a 6-game win streak and probably have higher quality wins on our actual schedule, and our losses being to the number 2 team in the country and Virginia Tech, you could have an argument to say that 9-3 Marshall should be above 10-2 Louisiana. I would certainly myself make that argument, but I don't think the committee is going to see it that way. So I think that's the biggest risk if both teams win, is that the committee is going to see a 10-2 record, throw them in at 25, and at that point they automatically host.
I absolutely agree with what you've just said. The one thing that we could take a flyer on that the committee does pay attention to is when a team's starting quarterback goes down, as we saw with Florida State last year. And you could make that argument against Louisiana right now. Now, Chandler Fields is not inexperienced. He got plenty of time on the field last year. There was a lot of injuries at the quarterback position. I'm pretty sure Louisiana fielded 4 quarterbacks throughout all of last season because of all the people that had gotten hurt. So a lot of guys had some experience back there. So it's not to say that he can't get the job done, but if they are to pay attention to some of those aspects, you could still see Marshall be possibly favored, even with the record, if they know that knowledge and they're paying attention. Like you said, the likelihood of that is kind of slim, but possibility maybe there. Again, and the other thing is kind of like basketball. They could say, look at Marshall coming in as the hotter team to end the season, right? Possibility. So, yeah, it wouldn't – how about this? It would not shock me. And the likelihood's slim, so I will say that. But it wouldn't shock me if Marshall were to lose to JMU in a very close game, like an overtime or a last-second field goal or some kind of craziness, and Georgia Southern lose to App State, and Louisiana maybe squeaks by ULM, that, I mean, record-wise, I guess, Louisiana still hosts. But as far as rankings go, I wouldn't shock me to see like Marshall still maybe be favored in a couple of these polls, even after all that is said and done, because like you said, the strength of opponent there is so greatly different to end the season. But
if everybody in the race lost this weekend, depending on how close Marshall can keep it with James Madison, I think will determine who hosts.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a simpler way to say it.
That we fall 3 spots and they might fall 10, for example.
True. Yep. And Battle for the Gavel saying snow game at the Joan for this Sun Belt title. That would be awesome. Yeah, I can tell you from the experience I had in Boone, it wasn't a currently snowy game, but just the atmosphere because of the snow and the snowballs, and we've talked about it. But it would be pretty electric there for sure, especially if it ends up being the Cajuns going to play in a snow game. Little culture shock for most of those guys on that team, because I think most of their roster consists of the deep South. So some of them may be seeing snow for the first time if that's the case. So we'll have to see what happens there. But let's get into this weekend's action, which starts us off on Black Friday with ESPN Plus game at 3:30. So if you go out shopping and you get into the craziness and you get involved and you come back and you want to chill out, turn on Texas State versus South Alabama. This one could be electric. Texas State favored by just 1 point, but look at that point total, 61.5 points. They don't expect much defense in this one. Casey, I'm not sure specifically how much you know about either team, but what would your thought be about maybe Texas State covering that 1 point, or you think South Alabama should be the favorite in this one?
I'm not going to say that I think South Alabama should be favored if I was Vegas looking at this, but I do think South Alabama is going to win. Like we've said a few times, they've turned a corner. They're 5-2 in conference play, which means that they were 1-3, right?
Yeah,
out of conference. So they've obviously turned things around. Gio Lopez impresses me. He has the ability to turn it on any given night. But on the other side as well, I mean, obviously with McLeod, they have an electric offense too. So this will probably be a pretty high scoring game. I would not be shocked. South Alabama is capable of putting up 87 points if they need to. So that did happen.
Yes,
but no, I think that they're on a relative roll right now, and it's at home for South Alabama. So I think that, and maybe it's the inner Marshalls saying we need this to happen, but I do think that South Alabama comes out on top. Close one, but they do win.
Yeah, I can see why this was a toss-up. I'm actually a little surprised, though, that Texas State is favored only because, what we say was that the home team typically gets those toss-ups because they're favored by 2.5 or 3 points kind of thing. So to see Texas State favored after what they just did against Georgia State last week, which, I mean, hey, they still put up, 44 or 48 points. So offense really wasn't much of an issue, but the defense couldn't stop Georgia State. And I don't know. I'll just side on the fact that Gio Lopez and this high-flying Jaguars offense could be a lot more potent to that Texas State defense than what they just saw this past week. So I don't know. I'm with you. I'm leaning South Alabama on this one just because of recency bias and the fact, again, that they're playing. I don't think, unfortunately for all of us, and we know that the students are mostly gone from every campus across the country. This is not going to be you got a great home field advantage this week. It's not going to be typical to see that.
Right.
You guys may actually have Marshall. We'll talk about that. Actually, I'll save that. I'll table that discussion for when we get to your game. But yeah, this is not going to be a rowdy, raucous crowd because of where both of these teams are in the standings, even though South Alabama has a chance still left to do something crazy. I just don't see this being a packed crowd for this game, unfortunately. But yeah, Friday night or Friday afternoon, I guess I should say, ESPN Plus.
Time.
It is. But you know what? The other thing that this game happened for that, I guess, is, it's the famous Alabama-Auburn game. South Alabama, being in the state, did not want to compete directly with that game for viewers' eyes, ticket purchases. So they decided to do what could be the smart thing and host it on a Friday. Most people will have off work, so maybe they head to this game and say, hey, I wanted to go to the Bama Auburn game, but it's too expensive, and this one's really affordable. I don't know if it'll work out, but possibility. And again, could be very worth it as far as the action on the field is concerned. So definitely think about that one if you're down that way. Brent Griffin is saying, fun fact, home team always wins between USA and Texas State. Jay's up. So he's definitely
that's good to know.
Yeah, it is. It is good to know. So there you go.
South Alabama knows that, Texas State's bowl eligible. And at this point, it's not that they don't have anything to play for, obviously, but it's going to be senior day for South Alabama. There's going to be some emotions there. Maybe that gets to them early, but they know what's on the line with this game. If Louisiana slips up and they win, they're in. And They didn't think that they would be in that position a month and a half ago. So, the fan base might not show up given that it's Thanksgiving weekend, it's Black Friday, the students are probably going to be home. But I do think that the players, they know what's on the line, and the coaching staff knows what's on the line. So you might see them pulling out the stops, whereas Texas State might not be.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see that because if anything, Texas State, they can't really do anything to move up or down. They know they're going to a bowl game. Maybe they rest some guys if the game gets out of hand type of thing or something. So, yeah, that is an interesting aspect to that one for sure. Okay, so the battle on the Bayou here with the Cajuns. I was like, why don't they call this like the battle for the boot, right? Because they always talk about Louisiana at the boot. Well, apparently that is between LSU and Arkansas, I think is what it is.
Oh,
yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was like, okay, it's not even an in-state thing, but apparently that is the trophy name for those two. So whatever. Anyway, this one's still a cool name. I still like the Battle on the Bayou. Nothing wrong with it. I just thought that the more obvious answer was not the one that was taken, probably because it was just gone before they had the chance. But regardless, Saturday, ESPNU, 12 noon, 11 Central Time. The Cajuns, not really surprising here, are favored by 9.5 points going into this one, with a total over-under at 48.5. We kind of talked a little bit about the feelings going into this game. I'm pretty comfortable taking the Cajuns in the 9.5, even though before the Texas State game, ULM was undefeated at home. They were 4-0 going into that Texas State game before they dropped it. So interesting that, they had a pretty good home record. But again, I think this is the strength of schedule coming into play here, I guess I should say.
Yeah, and the thing with, like we just talked about, the disadvantage of hosting a game on this weekend, obviously you don't like ending the season on the road, but it is not nearly the home field advantage that it would have been in those first 4 wins that they had, and not near the energy from the crowd either, just because they know they have much less to play for than when they were winning football games and excited about the team again. I think Louisiana wins this one, to be honest. I think they win this one. I know we need them to kind of lose, but I don't think they will. I will say I will not take them to cover the spread. Okay. And I don't think I would take the over in this one either. Maybe it's just because I was at the Marshall ULM game, and watching ULM in person just bleed clock, it is painful. It is a truly brutal experience trying to watch a game where ULM is playing, because they take forever when they have the football. We know they run the ball a lot, but not only that, they take time in between each play. They're doing, their defense is literally them time wasting, essentially. It's like watching soccer. So, I think that Louisiana wins, but I'm not sure that they cover the spread, or if they do, it'd be maybe 10 points, but I don't think we're hitting the over in this game.
No, that's
I look forward to being wrong, but
no, I don't think you're wrong in that at all. And one of the other aspects to this one is this rivalry. Cajuns fans ask whether this is a rivalry, right? They ask of their own fan base. Do you guys think this is actually a rivalry type of thing? Well, ULM definitely sees it as a rivalry, and that shows with recent scores, even when the Cajuns have had some really good seasons, and it's a disparity that's even bigger in record than it is here this year. Warhawks have beaten them a few times by surprise. So this one is going to mean a lot for ULM. Again, don't get it twisted that the Cajuns have the only thing to play for. ULM is playing for a bowl berth, as you mentioned earlier, Casey. So this is really, a bowl berth at home could still really excite the 500 people that'll be in attendance for this one. It could be really, really good. But honestly, the Cajuns probably would have more people in attendance unless they all decide to stay home, not travel on the road. But I think by Saturday, they should probably get up there and be able to do that drive pretty easily for a noon game. So I expect this one, like you said, for the Cajuns to take the victory, but maybe not that 48.5. I'm a little bit more comfortable in the 9.5. I just think ULM's offense can't keep up if they, get outscored early real quick or something. It's them catching up, like you said, with the offense and how they run it. It's not built for a shootout. It's not built for coming from behind. They have to jump out, control the clock early to be in control. Right. And I've seen enough out of the Cajuns to say, yeah, they could have a bad quarter or two, but I don't see them having a whole bad game necessarily. So we'll see if that plays into Marshall's hands, though, with a shocking upset or anything.
I'll go 28-20. It puts it at 48, which is under, and it's under the 9.5. So I'll go 28-20 in that one. Comfortable.
I like that.
Enough for Louisiana.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. That seems pretty good there. So Saturday, ESPN Plus. Again, this one starts a little bit. You got time to watch a lot of that Cajun Warhawk game before this one kicks off. So this one starts 2 Eastern, 1 Central time. The spread, very similar to the game before the Cajuns game, with Coastal favored by just 1 point and the 55.5 point total. Georgia State, though, almost put up that whole point total by themselves last week. So I'm not sure what favor Coastal is, especially being on the road, but I guess it's one of those other things like ULM. Georgia State doesn't have a great home atmosphere, and maybe they're saying, yeah, it's not much of a home advantage. That's all I could think.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, Coastal, apparently they're pretty hit or miss. Last weekend was shocking to me to see their offense get shut down like that. And I think the reason you see the point total where it is because they know what Coastal's offense is capable of. It's just we didn't see it last week. So, I think that in my mind, when I looked at this matchup, I just don't see a scenario where Georgia State wins. But then again, that's what makes the Sun Belt so interesting is that you can look at any team. When I was watching the Marshall Old Dominion game last week and we kept going back and forth with them, I'm sitting there thinking, they kept it close with South Carolina this year. Like this, it's not like a team that we can just walk over. We're going to have to fight for this. Well, Georgia State beat Vanderbilt this season. They are 3-8 and they beat Vanderbilt this year. So it's so hard to say what truly can happen. If I'm just looking at it based on how the rest of the season has gone, I would have taken Coastal in this matchup, but maybe it really is a toss up. It's just, maybe I don't know. I can't get my mind off of Coastal and their offense, but they struggled last week. So if they can get that corrected, I think they'll be fine. Yeah,
no, I don't disagree. The Coastal offense is very capable. They came alive at App State when that night game happened, or not at App State. It was at Coastal, but versus App State. I was very impressed with them. Vasco and Kim have kind of been splitting sometime because of how each other continues to play and not kind of light up the scoreboard, I guess. But, they have two very capable quarterbacks that can get the job done, and we've seen Georgia State struggle to win games. However, the part that didn't shock me that Georgia State has won some games is they've played a lot of teams very, very close throughout this season. They haven't been the typical Georgia State where they're getting blown out in a bunch of games. They've played, the game at App State was really a close toss-up at the very end. They could have won that one very easily. And so this is kind of similar to me in that regard where it wouldn't be a total shock for me at all if Georgia State takes this one too, because they could be playing as hot as they were this past week. And, against, again, a Vanderbilt team, they were up in front in that one. Vanderbilt was the team that was actually fighting to come back and have a chance at the end there. So could they, if they could put Coastal in a situation like that, we've seen Coastal not get the job done in some of those tighter games. So, and not even in some of those games aren't even tight, right? Like last week, that wasn't even a game. Georgia Southern just completely shellacked them. It's like, what was it, 26-6?
Yeah. It wasn't. I'm sitting there like, hey, it'd be great if you guys could beat them because it puts us in the championship game. And oh my word, dude, their offense just could not move the football. So,
no.
The more I look at it, I'm pulling up their schedules here. Both of them are 1-4 in their last 5 games. So it really, Vegas has the spread. I am surprised that they're giving the away team the advantage here. It could just be the knowledge of one team's offense versus the other. We know Coastal is known for having the high octane offense that's able to move the football. Like I said, they struggled last week, but that's probably what's given them the advantage here. I don't know about the point total though. I mean, both defenses are horrid, but it's not like the offenses have been consistently putting up that many points. And even if you took last week's scores where you had 55 on one side or 52 on one side, 6 on the other, that barely hits the over itself. So
that's true.
Georgia State might pull this one out with it being at home in senior day, but Coastal is fighting for a bowl game. I always look for where's the motivation at, and Coastal's got more motivation this weekend, I think, than Georgia State does, just because of that bowl eligibility on the line.
That is a good point. And honestly, it's kind of one of those things where if the crowd's not dynamic at the home atmosphere and the other team has more to play for, like you said, it's hard to get into it. And Battle for the Gavel is saying Georgia State by 2 touchdowns. It's just, I mean, it wouldn't shock me. They could keep that streak rolling, but I think Coastal could get it done, and they're going to fight pretty hard in order to do so. Now, neither of these next 2 teams have any chance for any postseason play, but Southern Miss is fighting for a victory in the conference for the first time all season. So maybe that's at play for them there. I'm not really sure if that's something that anybody's even talking about as an aspect to this game within the program. Obviously, fans are going to talk about that aspect. But Troy's coming off that disappointing loss to the Cajuns, which I said this in the wrap-up game. It's hard to look at that and say that that game was closer than the score indicated, because they did kind of get away from them there at the end. But you felt like that game was really close for a lot longer than it was, because that whole second half kept getting tighter and tighter before Cajuns pulled away yet again there at the end a little bit. So just I don't know. Troy by 17.5 though is a big point total. What do you think about that part of this?
I think I'll take Troy to cover, honestly. Okay. Southern Miss, and this is not meant to be harsh towards Southern Miss, obviously from the old Conference USA days, I wish to see them successful again. We're very similar programs as far as our community goes. Small town college football, typically at the top of the group of 5, but here in recent years have been struggling, and that's where they're at as a program right now. So I don't see, the 0-7 motivating them at all. I think it's going to be a Kent State situation where they get dominated, and at least they've got the one win, whereas Kent State did not get the win this season. They finished 0-12 after their game last night. But, we played them 37-3 at their place. This is on the road at Troy, and I don't even feel like we really dominated the game against them to make that happen. It's just how the game played out, and they've lost much worse than that this season. So yeah, I'll take Troy to cover. They might not cover by much, but I do think that I think they'll win by at least 20.
I could see that. I mean, if you think about the Trojans putting up 30 points against a pretty good Cajuns team last week, what they've been capable of a little bit earlier in the season against some other opponents, it's just not been consistent enough. And I don't know. I guess the point that is hard to, or the point that's easy to take about the 17.5 is I really don't see Southern Miss putting up many points on the Trojans defense, right? That's the part where it's like, I mean, I'd have to pull it up, and I don't have it right in front of me right this second, but Southern Miss's quarterbacks threw as many touchdowns as they had interceptions just a few weeks ago. So yeah, and
they're in the last 4 games, they're averaging less than 10 points per game.
Okay. So it is that bad. Yeah.
If they scored 10, at 31-10, that covers the spread, and I could easily see that being the score that we come out of in this one. So I don't know that we're hitting 48.5. In fact, I would say we're probably not hitting 48.5.
Yeah. I guess the only thing you could say is, like, since there is no tomorrow for either of these two teams, like, if they could roll up the score, do they just do it, right? They're in front of the home crowd, kind of go out on a high note. If you could put 56 up on the board, hey, do it, go out with style, go out having a blast, like, we'll have to see. But Warren is a Trojan fan. He's saying Troy by 14. So he doesn't think they'll cover the spread, but he does think they'll win two touchdowns. But these last 2 predictions have both been by 2 touchdowns. So interesting.
It's hard to be optimistic about your own team when you're 3-8.
True. Good.
It really is. It really is.
Very good point. But I do think there is some optimism for next season. Obviously, this year, it's going to be what it's going to be. Speaking of a team that you just saw here recently with ODU, they go on the road to finish their season against A-State, which has a little bit more to play for. Again, not well, technically, I guess they're already in a bowl game. Since it sounds like, and maybe you can confirm this too with what you've been reading, it sounds like there's going to be plenty of 6-win teams. So if they can improve their record to have 7 wins instead of just the 6, they may be more likely to get a bowl game, because it sounds like there may be some 6-win teams that are finally left out of bowls this year. Is that what you've been reading or hearing too, Casey?
It is. I think it was Brett McMurphy maybe that mentioned how many teams were left that could still get bowl eligibility versus how many, bowls there were. And I don't know what the number is of teams that are going to get left out, but, obviously being in a group of 5 conference with 6 wins, the likelihood that you're going to get passed over increases there. I will say though, the Sun Belt, we're not going to have 12 teams bowl eligible again this year. No. It'll be a decent number if everybody pulls out what they need to do this weekend. I think we're still looking at 9 or 10 teams if things go the right way, but we're not going to have 12. So if the Sun Belt bowls are weird now because ESPN has rights to certain ones that don't necessarily have like hard tie-ins anymore. Correct. So they just kind of draft and fill in the bowl games as they want to. But obviously them getting the 7th win, I think locks them in, but I'm not sure that they miss one because I think what they would likely do is look at the standings in the conference, and from where Arkansas State is going to be, at least in the top half of the West, I think they're probably still safe at 6 wins. But, well, now hold on a minute. My app is showing them at 7-4.
Oh, you are right.
So they got the win that they needed.
You're right. That one I missed. I missed updating Arkansas State's record there. So you're right.
Okay.
It is 7-4.
They're 5-2 in conference play, 7-4 overall. So disregard. I would say they are safe.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that is a mistake I did not catch. Man, I was really doing pretty good about keeping up with all that stuff. Must have copy pasted that one and moved it over and not changed the record. So yeah, my argument there was null and void too.
But as far as the game itself goes,
yeah.
It is so hard for me to go against Old Dominion after watching their offense last week. I was really impressed, and maybe I should think more lowly of our defense because we have been like we've had a lot of holes, okay, and we've always been bad against a scrambling quarterback. So it's hard for me to really put that much emphasis maybe on Old Dominion's offense. But if you just watch the way that they played, and that quarterback, like he just had instincts of a senior, and he's a freshman. So, or at least I am almost positive he's a freshman. But either way, this one's on the road. I still think Old Dominion will pull it out.
I'm on your side. I agree with you there. I just, again, the whole eye test aspect to me, I've just been a lot more impressed with what ODU has been able to do. Arkansas State's been able to pull a lot of these wins out towards the end, kind of getting by. Also, to me, this is one of those like unofficial test or litmus test of East versus West. And I think this is where you see if the East is really better, this 4-7 team could beat this 7-4 team. This team that's 3-4 in conference could beat the team that's 5-2 in conference. And you can start to try and make that argument again that the East is stronger than the West, because even though the teams record-wise aren't as good in the East, it's because they're better and beating each other up. And that's why you see such a disparity between East and West. And people always argue that, well, the West has had the champion. Yeah, but from top to bottom, the West hasn't necessarily been stronger. And where the West is really weak is the fan bases compared to the fan bases in the East. I'm not going to be afraid to say that, right? I mean, Southern Miss has got a crazy fan base, but when they're losing, they do disappear in the football aspect. They're crazy for their baseball over there, okay?
Right,
The only team that competes with them in baseball as far as fandom goes seems to be Louisiana, as far as, the top teams up there always showing up when you trash talk on the baseball aspect. But for football, it seems like the top teams over there in the East have a lot more fandom when it comes to the interaction on the social media aspect. At least that's what I've seen throughout my time in doing some of this. Battle for the Gavel does want to share a comment here. ODU will be playing with a purpose versus Arkansas State. They want to end the season on a high note, and the head coach needs the win for morale and maybe his career. Yeah, that is another aspect to this that we didn't talk about, but Ricky Rainey probably on the hot seat with the couple losses there to end the season, even though they weren't terrible though, right?
Well, that's the thing about this Old Dominion team, and they beat Texas State this year, so they had that crossover game. They beat a team that was favored in the West. And one comment about the East, I'll promote the East again here. The last 2 years, the East's best team was not allowed to participate in the conference championship game, or else they would have hosted and probably won the conference championship game. They weren't even allowed to participate in it, let alone be eligible to host it. And I think that might change the outcome of the last couple of years between the East versus West. As far as Old Dominion, though, all 4 of their losses in conference play have been 1-score games.
Yeah.
And now they're not, their road record is not great. They might be one of the best 4-7 teams in the country, though. South Carolina, they lost at South Carolina by 4 points. They lost against East Carolina, who I know they fired their coach, but the talent was obviously there because they have, they've turned things around quickly. They lost that game by 6 points. So two more 1-score losses. So 6 of their 7 losses were by 1 score. The team that beat them by 20 points was Virginia Tech. So, in all honesty, they're a pretty impressive 4-7 team, I suppose. They are not good in 1-score games. 2 of their 3 wins were not 1 score. So maybe that's the key to Old Dominion's winning this game, is jumping out quickly and getting a little bit of an advantage, because maybe the problem there is mismanagement of the clock or something like that in late games. I certainly felt like they mismanaged their situation against Marshall last week. I don't know how much of that game you watched, but in the fourth quarter, they were faced with the choice to go for it on 4th down in their own territory, both at the end of the first half and in the fourth quarter, before the 2-minute timeout. And they chose not to. They chose to punt it. They had 3 timeouts left, so I'm not saying it was necessarily a horrible idea, but given what you know about Marshall and how conservative we are when we have the lead, I feel like it would have relatively been safe in the second half when the game is on the line. You're down 7 points. You got a couple yards you got to pick up, and your quarterback's been scrambling for 15 yards on quarterback keepers the whole half. Why not go for it?
Yeah.
They punted the football. We fortunately broke out a couple of big runs to get first downs, and the game was over. But, I think they could have had more confidence going for it. And that might be why they're struggling to win these 1-score games. It could just be mismanagement of the situation, which still tells you that you're a 4-7 team, obviously, but I still think the record is a little bit deceiving. So I'll take Old Dominion to cover in this one.
Nice. Yeah, I'm doing the same. I just trust them a little bit more. So we will get on to Deeper Than Hate, the rivalry game between App State and Georgia Southern. Just 2 seasons ago, it came down to these 2 teams playing for a chance for a bowl. This time around, it's one team playing for a bowl berth, which is App State, and the other team playing for any shot or possibility to get into the Sun Belt Championship game. So both teams in this heated rivalry will have a lot to play for. This one, an ESPN Plus game on Saturday night at 6 Eastern time, 5 Central. Georgia Southern, this is one of those ones, it's a coin toss. Georgia Southern favored as the home team by just 2.5 points, with a total over-under of 62.5 points, which not expecting a lot of defense in this one, Casey.
No, they're not. Give me App State. I really do think, first of all, props to Georgia Southern. They have honestly had such a good season compared to what I think any of us thought they would put together. And that's not an insult necessarily what the expectations were. It's just that we expected a lot more out of teams like Appalachian State this year. And it feels like we're finally getting that from Appalachian State, or at least hints of it here in November. But every time I think that something's going to happen, I was pretty confident Coastal would win last weekend, and they shut Coastal down. So I'm hesitant to be as confident that App State's going to win this football game. But, they're playing for more than just themselves this year with the hurricane and everything. And I really think that bowl game on the line, you're playing for your community, and those emotions can carry you to places that if you didn't have that, you probably wouldn't reach. We certainly know that from the 75 game every year. I mean, I think we're like 9-1 or something in the 75 game. And, there's magic that happens when you have stuff that you're playing for. So I do think App State's going to win this game. I still think it'll be very close, but that home field advantage that Georgia Southern has gotten, as we've talked about, it's Thanksgiving weekend.
Yep.
And I don't know if it's going to be there. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my part to lock us in to the championship game, regardless of what happens at James Madison this weekend. But I'll take App State in a close one for this game. Now, the 62 points, though.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot of points. I mean, they're begging you to take the under on that one, I feel like.
Yeah. And I think I'd be safely doing that. I don't know. It's one of those, again, rivalry. Ben is saying he wouldn't consider this a rivalry. Well, Ben, this is a long established rivalry. Deeper Than Hate has lots of history behind it. So, there's probably people on the West Side that aren't familiar with all the rivalries that exist in the East. Marshall and App State have a long history of a rivalry. Now, I feel like that one's gotten so far spaced between when they were in the same conference and playing each other routinely that it's not as heated or as hot as it used to be, of course. But those SoCon days when they used to go head to head, I mean, head coach Sean Clark played in those games, and he always talks about how much he hates Marshall and all this and that. Well, the current iteration of App State fans, alumni, are very familiar with the Georgia Southern games from the SoCon days as well. And obviously they moved up at the same time as App State, and they've been going head to head for a very long time, both teachers, colleges. So there's a lot of history here. Won't go through all of that right now, but I was very shocked pleasantly that App State came up and performed well against James Madison and got that win last week. The consistency has been the issue all season. We've seen, Clemson's a pretty good team overall. I know they're not the best, but I was in attendance for that one, and they got absolutely demolished. They did not look good defensively, especially. Offense, that game specifically, Joey was still hitting receivers in the hands, and they just weren't coming up with the catches because of how well played the game was on the defensive back aspect for the Tigers. So the offense has been the strong suit. Can it continue to be the strong suit? I was surprised it was still as good as it was. Again, Caden Robinson, starting wide receiver, kind of superstar wide receiver for App State, was out for the season, did his senior day on crutches, but they still got downfield. Mekhi Jackson kind of came alive. He's a guy who's got a lot of speed. So if he could continue to do that, but we've seen what JC French has done on the other side. The aspect, though, where French and the Eagles came back and shocked Marshall, a lot of that wasn't JC French now, was it, Casey?
None of it was JC French. the biggest impact, this is going to sound horrible. The impact that spurred the comeback was his injury in that game. So, he is inconsistent as well. I'll put it that way. I certainly, just by watching their backup quarterback versus their starting quarterback, I felt like the wrong quarterback was in the game. And I think a lot of their fan base feels that way too. But he's put together good games as well. I think that App State, they know what's on the line in this game. Obviously they didn't get the game against Liberty this year. So it's do or die at 5-5 right now for App State. This isn't a situation, in 2018, Virginia Tech scheduled Marshall in the championship week because so many teams had missed games from the hurricane that year that everybody had these open spots on their schedule. Virginia Tech was 5-6, and they needed a chance at bowl eligibility. So they paid us off to come down there and lose so that they could remain bowl eligible for however many straight seasons. But I don't know that there's an opportunity here for App State to do that next weekend. Like, I don't think there's anybody that they could schedule to get that 6th win, because you're not allowed to pick up a 13th game. It would have to be Liberty, and I don't think that's going to happen. So this is it. This is it for App State. Yeah,
it would be interesting because we know now, well, I think Liberty may still have a shot at the conference championship game for them, right? Or are they out? I don't keep up with that much.
To my knowledge, they now have the tiebreakers that they need. but they play Sam Houston this weekend, and I think it probably comes down to whoever wins that game will get in against Jacksonville State.
Gotcha. Yeah, it would be interesting if they did what's seemingly impossible to do and schedule a game 1 week out. But the other aspect of that, I would say, is, if you could do that early on in the season when people still have money and they don't have other plans, like that could be realistic. I think you'd be struggling to put people in the stands at either location, honestly, for that type of a game on a last minute thing. But I don't know, maybe crazier things have happened, right? We saw BYU go to Coastal on a last minute 1 week turnaround time, and that ended up being quite an atmosphere. But
yeah,
I'm not sure.
Location matters. Speaking of, I just want to make, I know that, we might be running out of time, but I want to make a comment on the rivalry game aspect of these things. So like modern Marshall fans, I'm 27 years old. So SoCon days were before me, basically. I know the history with Appalachian State. I know that we had history with Georgia Southern even. And I feel the sense of, did the games mean something, but not so much because I see them as rivals, but just because it's a Sun Belt East game. They're all competitive. That's what the Sun Belt is. That's why JMU started out the season undefeated in conference play, and now they've got 3 losses. It's a competitive conference, and that's more so how I see it. I think that Marshall fans and I think other fans use the word rivalry a little bit too loosely. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't one. I'm just saying that we throw it around. Like one of our more prominent folks called the Virginia Tech game a rivalry game. That's it's not a rivalry game for either team. We play each other because we're regionally close, 3.5 hours away from one another, and we see them often, but it's not a rivalry game just because you have a history playing against somebody.
Correct.
It's a rivalry game when there's hate with somebody. And that's reserved to like 3 or 4 schools. East Carolina, we call our rivals, but it's friendly because of the plane crash. So, that's the one exception I'll make to the you have to hate the other team rule. But I definitely think that we are still searching for a rival in this conference. And I'm personally hopeful that it can be James Madison. It's easy to dislike James Madison just because of the way that some of their fans are on social media. I personally, I have respect for James Madison and what they're doing because it's just impressive, right?
Yes.
It's hard not to at least acknowledge that they've been incredibly successful. And the last time that we saw somebody come up and be that successful at the group of 5 level, I know App State's had their years, but you go back to Marshall. We won 5 of our first 7 seasons. We had conference championships in the MAC. So JMU is obviously only in their 3rd season. And unfortunately they weren't allowed to play for the other 2 seasons, or else I think they probably would have won. But that's a team that I want to see be our rival. And, I don't want to see them beat us this weekend and play spoiler and make us hate them more. Because Western Kentucky did that to us 10 years ago. But I would like to see this develop into a rivalry. I know you've switched on to this game. And so I just think that we beat them at their place in 22. They beat us at our place last year. And I think there's an opportunity to actually stir something up. So hopefully the battle for the gavel ends up sticking.
Yeah, it's definitely a catchy name. So I like that aspect, right? A lot of times you're thinking about it's all about the trophy. It's all about the trophy. It's not always about the trophy. As long as you have something that people like to say and people like to use, that's also an important aspect of it, right? I know that's one thing people always point to as app fans about there's no trophy for this one. There's no trophy for that one. It's it doesn't have to be a trophy. It just has to be a fun rivalry. Like you said, it has to mean more than just we play each other a lot. No, it has to have deeper rooted hatred, quite frankly. And again, that one that we just talked about has a lot of that. This one obviously is a little newer. It doesn't have that yet, but could it happen, right? All it takes is one incident between 2 players and boom, there's where it starts, right? Unfortunately, some of the stuff in the past in some rivalries has happened in the stands. We hope not to see that type of stuff, but those types of things happen. One of the things from the App State Georgia Southern one, just as a quick example, is one of the teams won, took down the goalposts, stomped on a team's pizzas outside their bus before they were walking it out. The goalpost went through, I think the goalpost went through one of the bus's windows, at least some car windows or something. It was all kinds of craziness. So there's a lot of history that's off of the field as well. And again, hopefully that type of stuff doesn't continue. But when those things happen, that's what builds the animosity towards one another. And this one does make sense to me too. I like this one. What kind of drive time is there between Huntington and Harrisonburg?
I think between Huntington and Harrisonburg, you're probably looking at 5 hours. Honestly, it's further than you would think.
Yeah.
But again, we're in neighboring states, so I still feel like it makes sense. And unlike us in Old Dominion, I just feel like James Madison has seen the success that we have seen consistently in our past, and that's what makes us similar in my mind. So I would love to see this be the game that the conference schedules for us every year during rivalry week. When we were in Conference USA, I feel like we ended the season with ECU a lot, which they actually were our rivals. But this would be a game to me that I feel like both of these fan bases are very involved with their programs. You could take Marshall and App State and say the same exact thing, but App State has its existing rivalry games. So I'm not trying to take away from them and the App State fan base for that reason. JMU, they're new to the conference. They might have played against some of these teams, but I don't know that they have a true rival other than everyone. And I just think that if you look at their supportive fan base and you look at our supportive fan base, I mean, we're still, even though I know our fans are disappointed at our attendance levels being at 85%, but we're still fielding a higher attendance than most teams in the Sun Belt. So our fan base is still very involved. We travel very well. When I go to away games, and that's what these pennants are. I go to one away game at least a year and I snag a pennant. I mean, we seriously, we take 5,000 fans to an away game, and that's unheard of for a group of 5 school unless their fans are really engaged and involved. So I feel like there's similarities between our two programs and where we want to go and how seriously we take football. Yeah. And for that reason, if the Sun Belt were to give us this matchup every year after Thanksgiving weekend, obviously you lose out on the home field advantage aspect of it, but I think it's still an intriguing enough matchup to get people to forego some festivities maybe and come out to the game instead.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see it. And I want to make a quick note because Battle for the Gavel is on and has started up a Twitter name. So go follow them as well, especially for this weekend's coverage of stuff. They are making a trophy next season's game in Huntington. It will be there. So I'm excited to see what that one could be. I think that one might be one of those trophies that people start talking about because, again, the name's good enough that you're immediately going, what does this trophy look like? So I'm sure there's some good work being done in that regard. The Google sucks free YouTube is the username over on Rumble. So we have somebody that's continuing to watch us over there on Rumble, and they happen to be a JMU fan. So saying it was historic when JMU made the AP top 25 list last year, first year in this division, which first time they were kind of I guess technically last year they still weren't eligible, right? Because they got to a bowl game because of the waiver, but they were thrown in there because of that. And it is interesting. You said that they were possibly going to be in the championship game, or they would have been in the championship game had they been eligible. But that one year early on, it was early in the season, so stuff does change. But they had played Troy, and it was was it an overtime game or? They did beat them, I will say that, but it was very, very close, and it could have been another really good matchup towards the end. I mean, had my team not made it in App State over them, it would have been really interesting to see a rematch between JMU and Troy in that game as well, because as a football fan in general, I'm watching no matter who's in it, but that one could have been really, really interesting. I believe that game was like a wet, rainy mess. So would in fact, actually, though, I think the game at Troy that had App State had hosted App State was also a rainy game. But had JMU been eligible, I believe they would have hosted that game against Troy in a rematch.
Yeah.
So,
I just think that, obviously JMU slipped up last year, but that was amidst all the distractions that were going on with the program trying to win legal battles, which I know it was annoying. But I was personally rooting for them to win those legal battles because it would have been good for our conference.
Yes.
What people failed to realize, and again, I get that maybe they were coming at it from like a better than thou perspective of we deserve this, but I do think the rule is stupid.
Yes.
that they were not eligible. And I think that the Sun Belt Conference needed to do a better job advocating for James Madison than they did, because not only does it help James Madison and their brand, it helps the brand of the whole conference. The whole reason Tulane is ranked in the top 20 right now is because of what UCF and Cincinnati and Memphis have done in previous seasons, and then Tulane is now all of a sudden doing. Tulane is not a good program historically. If you go look at the last 15 years, they've been horrible. They've had a good couple of seasons with a good coach and a good quarterback, and then, of course, they stole Sumrall from Troy, and he's great. But in the last 15-year span, they've been good for 3 seasons, and that's it. They are benefiting heavily from what Cincinnati did, from what UCF did before Cincinnati, and from the consistency that has been at the top teams of the American Conference. And honestly, they're benefiting from, and I said this on Twitter earlier today, the American promoted themselves for a long time as the Power 6 conference, okay? And they were not promoting themselves as the best group of 5 conference. They were promoting themselves as P6. They had literal, I mean, if you remember, their down markers said P6 on them.
Yep.
It was very annoying. And so we were all sitting here like, they're not P6, they're one of us, you know? But it made the media respect them as the top group of 5 conference, because they were like, well, you're not quite at this level, but we will acknowledge maybe that you were above everybody else at your level. And so it was a subconscious win for the American to get all of those New Year's 6 bids, in my opinion. And so what we started to see was 2-loss American teams that haven't really beaten anybody. They've just lost to good teams that are in the top 20 because the conference brand is respected. So I wish the Sun Belt Conference would do a better job advocating for its teams and its brand so that we can all benefit from it in this 12-team playoff model. Because really, I mean, if you compare, I know Tulane's blowing teams out right now, but they are playing sub 500 teams and their strength of schedule is 100. And that's with a game against a top 25 opponent in Oklahoma who just blew out Alabama. Their SOS is actually 100. So imagine how bad their conference opponents have been. And then we're sitting here and with teams like JMU that are in the top 50 in our own conference, and we've got to play now. Memphis, them playing Memphis will help, but I know this is a spiel I've gotten off topic. I'm just saying that it would have been good if JMU would have represented the Sun Belt in a New Year's 6 bowl. Maybe you get Signetti to stick around and coach in that game. Everybody points at them getting beat by Army last year. They didn't have players or coaches.
Yeah,
Air
Force in that one.
Yes, I apologize. Air Force at military school, but but they didn't have staff. They barely had their star players, and if they did, everybody was so distracted and trying to figure out where they were going to transfer to. So obviously, they're not going to win that football game. The military academy, they can't transfer. They don't have anywhere to go. So it's just everybody points at that as like, oh well, they weren't as good. No, they were good. They just got gutted when Signetti left, and I think they could have made noise in a New Year's 6 bowl. You know, they were not eligible for transition reasons. So
I will we got like 1 or 2 comments too I want to get to, but real quick, JMU is favored by 3.5 points, 52.5. You don't have to go real specific on the numbers, but what are your thoughts on Marshall pulling off the victory? Or do you think that this game is a literal coin toss as kind of the spread indicates here?
I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but I don't think it's a coin toss. And I think that we're going to need App State to beat Georgia Southern this weekend because JMU is blowing teams out at home. And I know that we've talked about the whole Thanksgiving aspect of things, you know, students not being in town, but JMU fans they show up and it's a difficult environment to win in. And I just feel like, I don't know. I don't have a good feeling about it. This reminds me 9 years ago, Marshall traveled to Western Kentucky to play in a play-in game for the conference championship game. And we finished that year 10-3. So basically what we're on track for right now if we were to win out. But we finished that year 10-3, and we went into Western Kentucky with 2 losses, and they beat us 49-28. Like, it wasn't close. They dominated the game. And we had a solid team. We had a solid offense. We had a really good defense. And what's different about this Marshall team is I feel like we have star players all around, kind of like you mentioned, but there's still a lot of holes on the defensive side of things. JMU clearly is capable of putting up points. My concern is that we become a little bit too one-dimensional on offense, and that might cost us this game. So I'm hopeful, obviously, and I think that, and I'm, for the record, I am supportive of our head coach, and I know you wanted to ask me about that.
Yeah.
But if this were at Marshall, I would go Marshall, but it's at James Madison. And for that reason, I'm going with JMU in this one.
Okay. I can respect it for the fact that it's hard to do that when you are a fan of your team. But I did the same thing last week when I had JMU and App State going up against each other. I took JMU. I thought it was the smarter pick. It was this instead of this that was talking, with the head over the heart. And, so I respect that decision. You also got to think the aspect to me that's important to this one is JMU's pissed off about last week, right? And like you said, now they're playing at home and they don't want to end the season with another one of those losses like they had against App State. I don't know if they'll play like that again. I don't know if they'll play better, but I'd lean towards them having a little bit extra pep in the step to not have their season. It won't end, right? Again, they're going to a bowl game, but they don't want to end at home with another loss. So we'll have to see how that goes. But again, very much respect your decision to go with that answer, even though we know that you don't really want to.
The optimism, if I did have to say the reasons why I think that it could turn out differently, is that we have so much on the line to play for. And this coaching staff, which has been berated for the last few months, has a lot on the line with this game. And if I'm in their shoes, I'm putting it all out there to make sure that I, at a minimum this year, make the conference championship game. So maybe we see, last week, I said the same thing, and we actually got a flea flicker that ended up, I think that the flea flicker went for a touchdown. So we don't normally pull out trick plays. We're a very conservative team, in my opinion, and we always really have been, at least for the last 5 to 7 years. But what I think, we have more to play for than James Madison does. I know they lost last week. They're going to be angry about that. They no longer have a chance at the conference championship game. So that's out the door. And as a fan, as somebody who sees all of our Facebook, groups and what people say, it's like, I'm sure they're not asking for Chesney to be fired, but it's going to be 39 degrees, a night game. It's going to be extremely cold, and it's Thanksgiving weekend. People have family in town, and I just think that if you are a fair weather fan or a more casual fan, you're looking at that and you're saying, you know what, we're in a bowl game. We can't really. There's no advantage for us to win this football game. I'm staying home and watching it on TV instead. And I hate that mindset. I am not a fan of that mindset, but I'm just saying there might not be as much energy in that stadium because they don't have the motivation more so than what weekend it is. I just think that they're going to be a little bit gutted as a fan base after the loss last week puts them out of the conference championship game the first year that they were eligible for it.
Yeah, true. Now, as an App State fan, obviously at some point it was very evident that I didn't want it to happen, but earlier on I was hopeful that this game was going to come down to JMU versus Marshall, tied in the standings. The winner goes to the conference championship game and possibly hosts, but at least gets the East representative, because essentially it's like a playoff game before the championship. So that would have been cool. Impartial, right, to both sides, but that would have been something that would have been a really fun aspect to tune in for and see. The Simulated Sports Project, go follow them out if you like video games, because they do some really cool stuff on that. They're saying Marshall versus JMU is an awesome matchup for people who like history. It's two founding fathers schools, and I mean, that is awesome. And that I guess he's agreeing with me that the chip on the shoulder for JMU regular season closer at home. And we've talked about that Thanksgiving Day rivalry weekend, and I agree, especially if this one goes right this time around, that they should keep this one as a last weekend matchup. I like it a lot. Herd Huddle was agreeing with you, saying extend Huff. I don't know how you don't if he wins this one, especially. And then I wanted to get back to, I like this question right here from Warren. Hopefully he's still watching us here. Is NIL for coaches more important than players in the G5? I haven't really heard anybody ask it like that. So what do you think about that question there?
Man, that's a loaded question. I think that I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to explain my yes. So, because obviously when you lose a star player, like we're going to lose Mike Green this year to the draft. Yep. He's a sophomore. We're not going to lose him to another team. We're losing him to the NFL draft because his stock is so high. So, whereas if he played for Ohio State, they have the money to keep him just like they did with their entire roster this year, right? So they didn't really have that many trainers that they did get. They paid a lot of money, but they paid to keep for the, sake of consistency. We, group of 5 teams cannot do that. That's the big negative about the NIL aspect for us, right? But what I do say often, and this is my revelation this year with Cignetti, for example, is that I think coaches matter a lot more than people are willing to put stock into. Ryan Day was born on third base, and he's still there, right? Like he's spending top 2, top 3 amount of money in the country in NIL, and they might win a national championship this year, but that's what it took for him to win a national championship. And again, this team Ohio State was already a national championship caliber program and roster when he showed up. He just was not able to beat Michigan. So, whereas Cignetti, on the other hand, he has been a winner at every level. Google me, right? But he shows up. He takes a group of 5 roster and goes 11 and assuming they win this weekend, goes 11-1 in the Big Ten. Where previously last year I was saying, it wouldn't make any sense for Huff to leave us for Michigan State, for example, because why would you want to go? Now, this is before they got rid of divisions. So this is when Michigan State would have been playing against consistent teams every year that had better resources. But Indiana, Cignetti got a fortunate schedule this year, didn't really have to play a ton of the top teams. And the ones like Michigan that he did have to play were having a down year. But there's still something to be said about the fact that he took his stars are a group of 5 kids, right? The wide receiver name is skipping my head right now. So it apparently,
I was ready for you to say the quarterback. It's like, Cordis Rourke from Ohio,
Yes, from Ohio. And then it starts with an S. I'm from JMU, so Sarant or something like that. So,
oh man. I'll think about it because he had a brother. They're not Surratt. That's it.
Surratt. Yes, Surratt. Yeah. So, but that's what I'm saying. They're the 2 impact players for him. And I know there's been multiple. Like the running back, I think is still an Indiana guy, but that's still significantly different than Caleb Downs or somebody like that. So, I think coaches. What he is showing me is that coaches can be a lot more important than the talent that you have on your team, or at least the talent that you think you have on your team. Those could be guys that were 3 stars just because they committed to James Madison instead of Ohio State, when in reality, those websites would have upgraded them the moment they committed somewhere else. So, but with the just on paper talent, Cignetti has done something that nobody thought he would do at Indiana in year 1. And Bob Chesney has done something after James Madison got gutted. And they have still been successful. I know they've lost 3 games in the Sun Belt, but I mean, the guy came in and put up 70 points in a win against UNC. They got to be happy about that, right?
The aspect of that, I was there for that one in person because, again, it was literally in the same city that I live in. The aspect of that was so impressive is people that didn't get to see it, right? They just see the final score. He was aggressive as hell in that game. He was not scared to go for certain things. I mean, after they scored I think it was their second touchdown. He did an onside kick out of nowhere. Who the hell does that in a game like that, right? Because you look like an idiot if it doesn't work. But he was not afraid to do it. He went for it on fourth and short a couple times. I believe at least one was in their own territory, just on the other side of the 50, where it's like, ooh, you may be in trouble if you don't get this. So I agree with you. Absolutely important for NIL, the coaches aspect being very important. Also because, like you said, there's a lot of movement with players now, right? So you are always, no matter what your coaching situation is, you're going to have players coming in and out every single year. That's just the new normal as it's going to be. You don't want that carousel at the head coaching position. You need some consistency there so that these kids know, hey, this guy doesn't just up and leave all the time. We know that they do for money when it comes around. But if you have a little bit more money to give, they don't need to go out and grab that. They don't need to go leave for a little bit more money. That was the aspect with the Huff stuff that I was confused about. It's like, there's no way in hell Southern Miss is going to pay Huff a lot more money than what Marshall can do. Maybe some more money, but it's not going to be like millions more or anything. So it's like, I think he's kind of mentioned it in the media and stuff. Like, he's been rumored to be at even bigger programs, and he says, I'm still here. Right. So I don't know if you want to talk about him specifically in this realm as well or not, but.
Well, I will talk as though he's listening, and like I would want to in any situation. That I will give him the benefit of the doubt. Number one, to make just a comment on his rumors to other places. I mean, we pretty much know that he's interviewed at other power schools, not like before the season has ended, and very early on when he was at Marshall. And, when you're in your second year at a program and you go into Notre Dame and you win I know the score wasn't necessarily a dominating score, but as somebody who was at that game, we were in control of the game. Like we won that game. It wasn't a fluke. So when you do that, you're going to draw attention to yourself, and it's normal to take interviews at other places. It just sucks that the timing sucks, obviously, but I don't fault him. The realistic Marshall fans knew that Huff was not a long-term coach at Marshall. And if he was a long-term coach, it would be because he was mediocre. We brought him in because he was a top-tier recruiter and a top developer at the running back position, which he has proved to be. Bringing Laybourne in when Ali got hurt, a guy who was literally doing like DoorDash in Florida for a year, brought him in and made him into a star player for us. And then when Ali came back, got him drafted, even though he was injured at the Senior Bowl, still got drafted relatively high for a running back with his injury. And then now AJ Turner's coming out of nowhere, third string running back to start the season, now leads the country in different statistical categories. So he is clearly capable of doing what we thought we were getting him for, right? And so I just think that there's an unrealistic expectation that he was supposed to be here for 10 years like the previous guy who is a West Virginia native. He wasn't going to go anywhere else because he was at the end of his career. We're hiring the Bob Chesney type guys that, look, you're going to come in here, you're going to have some success, and at some point you're going to leave. Huff has been mentioned in the top 5 of every, middle tier power 4 open coaching position that I've seen. When the UNC job came open the other day, within 20 minutes, Huff's name was mentioned by a not Marshall account for somebody that was a candidate for the job.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, people want him for his recruiting. And Marshall is not somewhere that is going to provide him with endless amount of money to recruit. So he's recruiting solely based on the tradition that Marshall has and his ability to develop players, which he has proven he can do. So, I like Huff. I think we were rightfully hard on him for the way that the Georgia Southern game ended. His responsibility is not necessarily in the fumbles themselves, but in the fact that he was trying to play 2 quarterbacks in the fourth quarter in that game. And when he put Braxton in to run the football instead of just keeping Stone in, Braxton came in not being warmed up or whatever, and he comes in and fumbles the ball twice. Like, he didn't give them the right chance that they needed to just play the game out. So that was his fault in the situation, but you still have to put fault on the players for the safety and the 2 fumbles as well. And I love both of those guys, but it's hard for me to look and say, oh, that was all our coach's fault, because it wasn't. It was a fluke situation to begin with, but you can call the plays, the same plays that we busted out for a 15-yard run with Braxton against Old Dominion to get the first down to win the game was a fumble against Georgia Southern. It just went differently. It wasn't executed as well. So, I think Huff has done a solid job at Marshall. We moved conferences. Conference USA was weak. It is still very weak, and I'm glad we got out. So we moved conferences, and we knew that it was going to be a little bit of an uphill battle. And we went 7-6 in his first year, and I think we were all like, it is what it is, right? We didn't. In my opinion, he was left with not necessarily a depleted roster, but one that was not in the top 10 of Conference USA recruiting metrics. So
Right.
I feel like he was coming in with a little bit of a disadvantage. And then when he was there for a full year, he goes in the transfer portal, gets some of the guys he wants, and we go in and we have one of the best wins that we've had since being in the FBS at Notre Dame. And we went 9-4 that season. So that was good, right? Last year, last year didn't go so well. My biggest thing with Huff is that he's very good at developing talent, and I think he's good at seeing talent. Like, he played Ali over our senior that year, and Ali went for like 28 touchdowns. And our previous coach, in my opinion, would not have started a freshman or sophomore over a senior. So Huff saw that, and it took Ali to the NFL essentially. But what I do think that he struggled with at the beginning of this season was, the guys that he's riding with on offense now are not the people we started out the season with. And if we go into Virginia Tech down 3 and going into the fourth quarter with a different starting quarterback and running back, does that game end differently? Maybe. Because we tried to run the ball a lot with Stone at the end of that game, and he's just not – it wasn't his fault. He's just not bigger. So when he gets hit, he goes backwards. When Braxton hits somebody, he falls forward a couple more yards. And we turn the ball over in the red zone on a 4th and 1 where Braxton probably would have just fallen forward just because of his physical build. So long story short, it's a two-way street to extend a coach. And I'm not sure that Huff wants to be at Marshall anymore. Obviously, I think he's a respectable person, so he obviously wants to win where he is, because why would you not if it's your job, right? You don't want to ruin your own career. So I think the people saying that he wants to lose here, that's stupid.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to sabotage your own career just because you're upset at a fan base. You're not going to do that.
Right.
And the locker room loves Huff. Like, the players love him. And I think that should speak more about him than how fans feel about him at certain times, is that the players love Huff. And I've heard that the locker room is in good shape. And when the locker room is in good shape, you go on a 5-game win streak and you're in a position to be in the Sun Belt Championship game. So that's because of this coaching staff. Now, so I just don't know that he wants to extend his contract, because it's out. It's out at the end of the season. So if if it's up to him, I get it. But let's say that it's the school's fault and we haven't extended something yet. Then why should we be mad that he's interviewing at other places?
Correct.
If your employer told you, hey, you're going to be without a job in 33 days after the bowl game, what would you do? You're not going to sit there and just keep working and not look at other places. You're going to start probably interviewing. So there's a chance that we have encouraged him to do that. I don't know that it's total speculation.
Right.
And I hate the distraction in the middle of the season, but we cannot fault him until we extend him for interviewing at other places, because otherwise he's going to be without a job, and he's got a family and kids. So why should we be upset about that if it's our fault?
No, I totally agree with you there. 100%. You've got a guy who's known quantity. He's winning games. He's, like you said, he's got control of the locker room. The locker room likes him. Yeah. Why are you trying to move on? And I'm not saying, again, those are not confirmed reports of any sort, but the possibility that you could move on because he's not extended already is, like you said,
sure.
It's got to be something that Huff's got in the back of his mind at the very least. It's fair. It's fair because neither side has done maybe what they thought was going to happen so far. So
we're very hard on coaches because of, I think, the early six, and I think JMU is going to run into the same thing at some point. And App State, I think, is, with Sean Clark, obviously, he had some good seasons, but obviously this year hasn't gone that well. But, when you see high levels of success in the last 25 years, that becomes the standard, even though maybe it shouldn't be. That becomes the standard for the program and the expectation every single season. Now, I would say that we could say that we expect that because, again, we won 5 conference championships in our first 7 years, and we had Heisman finalists on our team. But the landscape of college football has changed, and I recognize our resources are not going to be able to keep up, maybe even with somebody like JMU's resources. So that looks a little bit different. But the expectation should not be 12-0 every single season. And the moment that somebody loses, like, I guarantee you Tulane fans were not in a full panic when they were 2-2 and lost 2 Power 4 games. Our fan base was ready to, like, I mean, we're boycotting games over 3-3. Now, again, it was a dramatic loss, and I was very upset. Okay. Yeah. But our other two games, like, nobody expects us to go into Blacksburg or Columbus and win. Those are two of the hardest places to play in college football. And even though in the back of our minds, we're like, well, look what we did at Notre Dame. Like, we could do it. Like, realistically, don't expect that. We're taking all these pay games now because we need the money. And I just think Marshall fans have got to be prepared to start looking at some numbers in the loss column early on in the season, knowing that conference play might not go that way if you continue to support the team.
Yep.
So that's where I'm at. I'm just hoping we get the win this weekend so that I don't have to argue as much with people anymore.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. It'll make it a whole lot easier. Randy saying we have huffed this to death. Coaches will be gone between 3 and 5 years for good or bad reasons. 3 to 5 years. That's what it is in the Sun Belt. Yeah, I mean, but again, that's what Casey goes back to. You know these types of things going in because otherwise there's a reason they're sticking around longer, and it's because they didn't have anywhere better to go because they were mediocre coach. So you almost
what's the feeling with Sean Clark? I mean, because he played there, and obviously I think that makes it difficult to break ties with him, even when you're a little disgruntled. So what's the general feeling with the fan base about App State right now?
Yeah, so Seth and Marv both coming from either graduating from App State or living up there currently, so they have a lot of inside detail on some of that stuff. But the consensus overall is that most people are ready to move on from him because he's not hitting, like you said, 12-0 mark. It's like, come on, guys, it's not realistic. But the unrealistic aspect of also winning conference championship each year, or at least getting to the game, has not been met, really. So, again, we got to take into the fact that they made that one because JMU was ineligible. So,
right.
When you bring those types of things into consideration, it's just as bad as people are saying. Then you look at it like the Huff situation. Got to win over Notre Dame. Sean Clark got one over Texas A&M. It's tough sometimes to say you want to move on when you know this guy lives and breathes black and gold and is what you always wanted as a coach. He wasn't going to go anywhere, even if he's successful. Exactly. It would take a massive contract from a huge school. And even then he'd probably I still don't know, that he's that kind of guy. Like, I think a lot of people love him in the fan base as a person. People get frustrated with some of the coaching decisions. But again, like you said earlier too, some of that isn't really just the coaching. It's execution of the call that was made. So, when you go for it on 3rd and 2 or 4th and 2 and you only get a yard, you're saying, well, that call was horrible. Well, was it? Or did the guy that was supposed to block so-and-so not get the block? And if that would have happened, he's getting 3 yards when we're not even talking about short. He's in the positive. So I have a hard time, like you do, saying that any of these coaches should move on. Again, I'm a little bit more on the consistency level when, it's not been terrible, right? And you've got some players that didn't maybe live up to expectations in certain regards too for App State this year. I got to put the blame and the onus on more than just one person. To me, it's not just one coach. But as we know, ultimate boss, you take the wins, you take the losses as the head guy. So I see the frustration. I understand it. The other aspect, like you said, with the money part of it, like App State doesn't have the money to buy him out and bring in somebody and pay them millions. Like they just don't have that. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. I think if he wins here this weekend and gets to a bowl game, even if he ends up losing the bowl game, I think he's here for next year for sure. After that, is it come to a Huff situation where they just don't extend him and kind of see how it plays out? Yeah, I think that's very possible. So I know most fans are ready to move on, though. I think that's the sentiment that I've heard more so than anything else.
Well, but he's done what he it's hard to get rid of, and that's the risk of bringing in somebody that is so tied to the program. Is it's hard to get rid of them unless they resign. You know what I mean? And because the only power conference team that I think he would ever leave for might be West Virginia, just because it's his home state. But he's a, like you said, black and gold all the way, or yellow, gold, yellow.
It's technically the colors are black and gold, but it is more of a
it feels more
yellowish color. Yeah, it's definitely Wake Forest has well, they're like an hour and a half from Boone, and they have the actual black and gold. And I think App went away from that on purpose to kind of differentiate themselves in that regard. So, yeah, it's called I think they call it University Gold, but yes, it's very much a yellow more so than a gold. But Warren's asking, what do you want to be, a big fish in a small pond, or the opposite? So it is definitely different. And Battle for the Gavel thinks that the coach on either side for the deeper than hate rivalry would be. I would be shocked if Hilton was fired, because they're still going to go bowling even if they lose that game. And it's hard to say that like a guy who gave you a chance to be in a conference championship game needs to be fired. I don't know. I don't know. But Randy wants to kind of get on that same kind of bandwagon. First of all, he says Marshall will lose, which again, Casey, that was not a surprise to you. You've trying to throw out what you hope is the opposite with some reverse psychology there. But Georgia Southern will win. Huff and Clark will get fired after Georgia Southern wins the Sun Belt. Say it. And I'll skip that word that's in front of that so that that doesn't come true.
Thank you.
Oh man. But yeah, there's a lot of comments coming in about the coaching stuff. So we hit that topic at the right time to keep everybody going back there. Yellow, good color for App State.
That's my final comment on the coaching thing. We talked about money for coaches versus money for players.
Yeah,
I was shocked that Sumrall would make a lateral move to Tulane, and if a Tulane fan would not see it that way, but it was a lateral move. The only thing that wasn't lateral was the brand recognition of Tulane and the American Conference. That's the only reason that I think that they're in the discussion the way that they are right now. And I think that's, it's not that he made a bad decision. It was just a shocking decision, and it was a bad look for the Sun Belt. But what I do like about the 12-team playoff model, going to the comment about big fish in a small pond or the other way around, is that you do have an argument for you could turn to somebody that's having a successful time like Chesney, Huff, whoever, and say, listen, if you stay here and put together the right pieces, that gives you a better odds to make the college football playoff than if you were to take a job at Vanderbilt, where you're going to have to beat an insane number of teams that are in the top 25, whether or not they should be, and just to get into that position to make the playoffs. Or, you could run the group of five and at least every year be one of two teams in conversation for the playoff. And that would be my argument to recruits too. So I think that because they've expanded the playoffs, there is an opportunity to keep people from going to certain places. And I think it's going to make those hot coaching prospects maybe consider things a little bit more. Like, I think UNC is a good job. I think that they've got resources, and the ACC is, as we've seen with SMU doing well this year in their first season, it's a winnable conference immediately. The Big 12 is a winnable conference immediately. But Indiana, I think, now Cignetti is a great coach. So if you're a great coach, maybe it works. But they didn't, like we said, their schedule was kind of iffy this year. But the Big 10 and the SEC, I don't know that you can go in there and win to the level that you need to win at to get to the playoffs immediately, except for rare circumstances. So I think it will make people hesitate to leave programs where they know they've got something good, unless they are for sure that the opportunity is better somewhere else to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think the large part of that Tulane move was like, private school, more money, and apparently he's kind of been a fan of the Louisiana, the New Orleans area. I think like maybe it was his wife's family who's kind of really close to that area. So like that was another aspect of play, like more money plus wife's happier, hey, everybody
that's important too.
It is important. So that is an aspect to some of those moves that, we don't typically get to hear until after, right? Like, I think it was an interview he did after that let me know that he had, extended family in the area. That's like, okay, well, we didn't know that going in. Maybe some people closer to him did, but their average fan doesn't know those types of things. So some of those things make a little more sense when you get to find them out and understand their thought process behind the move more than just one thing. But I do agree with you. Like, you take a chance to be at a bigger school for 2 or 3 years if it doesn't work out. Sure, you've made the money, but you could have been at one school for 15 years and made that same money, and now you're an even bigger name. You go into record books, you go into history books, you get guys coming to you because they know you are a commodity that is there and you're going to stay because you've done it and you've shown that you've done it. It's hard because, again, part of that is a money aspect. They want to be rewarded for the job they do, and we know the Sun Belt has only so much money. I do like the fact, though, that we don't have any private schools here. I like the fact that it's mostly an even playing field for the most part. It's not perfect.
Liberty, man. I want liberty. I'll just.
Do you?
I do. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
What is it?
I'm a liberty hater. I'll say that.
I recognize that our conference apparently, because they just signed up for Twitter Premium like a month ago, and clearly the money is needed. And so I'm just saying liberty brings the media and resources from that standpoint that I think would benefit the conference. But I do understand the reasoning for not wanting a private school in this mix. So yeah, it does give everybody somebody to hate in that regard, though. So it would be interesting in that regard. I mean, geographically, it is a good fit. I won't argue there. It does make sense for that. When I went to JMU, I actually went right through Lynchburg, which was the first time I'd ever been through there. I was like, what? It is a nice campus. The money is well spent. It's all the other aspects of what they bring that people don't love and want to get involved with. And I think that is probably what keeps them from already really having been invited in this last round. Everybody needs a villain, is what Joseph Banville is saying. Yeah. Well, it seems like maybe JMU is that for right now. They can just take up the mantle. But we'll have to see how that works out. A coach will not be at a school for 10 plus years like Blakely. Yeah, I mean, it's not likely. Not anymore. It's not likely. And again, if you have one there, it could be because they're kind of mediocre and the school doesn't have much more money to spend. And so that's why it stays that way. So you almost want those 3 to 5 guys so that you know that they're being successful. And the reason they're being poached is because your team is winning. So there is that aspect. Casey, any final thoughts before we end the show here? Oh, I'm sure I have plenty of them if you give me enough time to think about them. Whoever I want to take a shot at, maybe it's Ryan Day. If he loses to Michigan this weekend, I think he's gone. And that's the pressure that comes with a job like that. So
that's crazy. Yeah.
I mean, dead serious. My father-in-law is a Ohio State fan. And I think the general sense, even though he might not disagree with it, is that if he loses to Michigan this weekend, you can't lose that game 4 or 5 straight times with that fan base and get away with it. So there's a lot of pressure that comes with those jobs, and maybe it's not worth it. It's not worth the money to be miserable. So that's my final thought. I don't know. That doesn't really fit with the rest of the conversation. Go Herd would be another one. So
there you go. That's the one I thought I was going to get first, to be honest with you. But
it's got to be last. It's got to be last.
Okay. Yeah. That's better.
And Boise. I'm rooting for Boise as well.
Yeah, that's true. I can see why, because you're going to go out there. So definitely enjoy that one, and share some stuff on social media. I'm sure you will, but we'll want to see how that goes for you.
I hope it goes well.
Yeah, well, and hopefully you have reason to go there and hurry back home, right?
That's exactly right. I hope I'm stressed about getting home that Saturday on time. So I've got it mapped out just in case. So if something goes bad this weekend, I just won't be as stressed on the return flight, but it is doable. It is doable if we host in Huntington next week. So I hope that's the situation that I'm in.
Well, I'll be watching the Twitter feed to hear all the updates from that. That's for sure.
Sounds great, Dom.
Casey,
I appreciate you having me.
Blast. Yeah, this was an absolute blast, man. I really appreciate you. You outdid me with the background. You probably have a better mic than I have set up here. So absolutely phenomenal job, man. And we will certainly be having you on again here in the future.
I appreciate it. Go Herd.
See you guys.